I didn't say a word when the HOA president slid the notice across the conference table, her voice trembling with the kind of fury usually reserved for parking violations that weren't hers to give. She pointed at the piece of paper as though it held some mystical authority over my property, insisting my assigned parking stall had been revoked and that I would need to park across the street from my unit like everyone else. I just set my deed on the table, the original 1983 document from when the complex was built, clearly stating that my stall was legally attached to my unit and non-transferable. Her eyes flicked between the signature line and mine, confusion creeping into the rigid certainty she had wielded so confidently for months. I sipped my coffee, quiet, calm, letting the room absorb the truth before it hit her like a cold draft. The attorney, usually so quick to interject, went still, flipping through their binder as though hoping my deed was some ceremonial piece of paper and not legally binding. By the time the silence settled, the power had shifted. I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was the person who held the proof, and they had nothing left but sputtering indignation. That was the day the HOA finally understood that titles and law carried more weight than threats and tantrums. Before all this, life was simple, measured, and quiet in a way I'd almost forgotten people could live. I had moved into the complex after retirement, seeking a calm patch of land where mornings began with coffee on the balcony overlooking a row of maples, and evenings ended with the sun bleeding gold across the asphalt of my assigned parking area, the one the HOA had now decided I didn't deserve. My unit was modest, but it was mine, with a small garden patch I tended to out of habit rather than pride, and a balcony that caught the wind, just right for reading, sketching, or listening to the occasional distant laugh of neighbors I mostly ignored. I wasn't trying to start anything. I just wanted a quiet corner to live my post-work life without complication. My routine was the rhythm of peace. Morning walks to check the mailbox, afternoons rearranging potted plants or fixing a creaky screen door, weekends spent working on small carpentry projects that kept my hands busy but my mind at ease. It was a life of gentle independence, a slow retreat from chaos. I never imagined that the very people entrusted with the management of this neighborhood would turn so aggressively against me, or that the legal attachment of a single parking stall could become the epicenter of conflict. The first sign of trouble was absurd enough to make me question my own perception. A neon notice taped to my garage door, declaring me in violation for unauthorized use of a designated parking area, arrived one morning with the subtlety of a foghorn. It accused me of taking liberties with my own assigned space, something I'd had for over 30 years, and threatened fines that were both substantial and recurring if I did not comply immediately. I stared at the notice, half expecting it to dissolve like a bad dream. The letter referenced bylaws that had been amended years after my purchase and cited restrictions that simply did not apply to units with legally assigned stalls. It was petty, targeted, and unmoored from reality, yet carried the weight of potential legal enforcement. The shock wasn't anger at first, it was confusion. I had never thought about ownership of my parking space beyond convenience. Now, suddenly, this minor entitlement was under siege, and I was forced to reckon with the petty, meticulous control an HOA could exert over daily life. I tried diplomacy first, hoping for some rational resolution. Emails were sent, polite but firm, each citing the exact language of the governing documents, pointing to historical records, and requesting clarification on how my stall could suddenly be deemed revocable. I attached scanned copies of the deed, photographs of the original assignment of stalls, and a timeline of occupancy that should have ended all questions before they started. I suggested a meeting, offered to bring documentation in person, and emphasized my desire to resolve the matter amicably. The HOA's response, when it came at all, ranged from smug silence to thinly veiled mockery. Notices of fines increased, each letter more absurd than the last, occasionally implying that my unauthorized occupancy could impact neighbors or violate unspecified safety codes. That was the moment I stopped seeing the situation as a small irritant and began seeing it as a quiet chess game. I stopped sending emails. I stopped asking for compromise. I began reading property law. I became methodical. Nights stretched into hours of poring over county property records, local zoning ordinances, and the original development documents. I requested official surveys from the county recorder, digging out the infrastructure layouts from the 1970s, cross-referencing every line to verify that my parking stall's boundaries were legally defined and attached to my unit. I photographed every notice, kept every email, and documented interactions with board members down to their tone and phrasing. Isolation settled in as some neighbors, wary of conflict, turned silent when I passed, avoiding my gaze during walks. My partner, initially skeptical, grew worried over the obsessive attention I paid to old documents and obscure clauses, while my children, visiting on weekends, were caught between admiration for the process and discomfort at the tension that had seeped into our otherwise peaceful home. Each night ended with legal text spread across the kitchen table, highlights, sticky notes, and coffee rings marking the slow buildup of a case that was as precise as it was quiet. Then the moment arrived. I brought my file, thick with decades-old deeds, official surveys, and legal interpretations, to the HOA board meeting, not with fury, not with shaming, but with the calm inevitability of someone presenting irrefutable facts. One by one, I laid out the documents, showing the original assignment of my stall, the chain of ownership that proved it was non-transferable, and the state statutes that reinforced my claim. The president's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through pages, realizing that the authority she had wielded so confidently was built entirely on bluff. The attorney, once so ready to intimidate, hovered uselessly at the edge of the table, unable to counter historical records with anything but strained silence. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was louder than any scream, and in that silence, the room acknowledged the shift in power. I watched faces that had been hostile for months turn pale, realizing their threats had been meaningless, their fines unenforceable. The quiet dignity of law had restored order without spectacle. After that day, the HOA's influence over my life evaporated almost overnight. The president resigned quietly a month later, citing personal reasons that no one doubted were related to the meeting. The remaining board members, chastened by the display of evidence and legal clarity, began consulting documents before sending notices, and the tone of community meetings shifted from coercion to civil discussion. Neighbors, some of whom had been quietly siding with the board, now approached me with a mixture of respect and tentative acknowledgement, often offering a nod or brief conversation instead of intrusive comments. My life returned to its rhythm, unbroken by the petty bureaucracy that had threatened to upend it. I spend mornings again with coffee on the balcony, evenings tending my garden, weekends working on the balcony railing or small home improvements. The parking stall is still mine, legally and practically, a quiet monument to careful research, patience, and the undeniable weight of property rights. Now, when I walk past the old board members in the lot, they wave or look away. Either way, it's quiet again, and that quiet is everything. I wouldn't call it victory, not in the celebratory sense. It's more the satisfaction of restoring balance, of watching bureaucracy bow to evidence and law without a single raised voice. The lesson wasn't about being clever or ruthless. It was about preparation, precision, and letting documented truth do what anger cannot. The HOA lost power not because I shouted or defied them, but because I knew the law, documented everything, and waited until the moment when their bluff was exposed to everyone in the room. That moment, still vivid in my mind, was the culmination of months of quiet labor, and in it, I found something I had almost forgotten: peace. Now the lot is as it always should have been, my stall still there, untouched, a small but permanent reminder that patience, law, and calm resolve outweigh noise, threats, and hysteria every single time. The neighborhood itself seemed to breathe differently after that. Meetings are shorter, emails fewer, and the oppressive micromanagement that once hovered over every garden, balcony, and vehicle has diminished to near irrelevance. People speak politely, neighbors nod, and life unfolds with a rhythm that matches my original vision of retirement. Quiet, self-directed, and free from unnecessary interference. The HOA still exists, yes, but it exists differently, tempered by the memory of the meeting where law, evidence, and patience spoke louder than their proclamations ever could. I drive past my stall every day, see it empty or full, and feel no tension. The world feels orderly again, governed not by fear of petty reprisal, but by the clarity that comes from knowing what is yours is truly yours, and no amount of bureaucratic bluster can change that. It is a quiet satisfaction, a personal restoration that requires no applause, only acknowledgement that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the facts speak and letting the world finally catch up. Months later, I still think about that moment at the table. It wasn't dramatic, and there was no cheering crowd, but the lesson is indelible. Power built on fiction collapses quietly when faced with fact. The stall remains mine, my peace remains intact, and the HOA has learned, in the softest possible way, that the reach of an organization ends where legal truth begins. I still tend my balcony plants, sip coffee in the morning light, and watch as neighbors pass with curiosity, respect, or indifference, any of which is preferable to harassment. That, ultimately, is the restoration I sought. Not revenge in the cinematic sense, but restoration of life, dignity, and simple rights that had been quietly ignored until I chose to assert them. The deed remains on file, my parking stall untouched, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that preparation and patience trump aggression lingers in every step I take through my lot. Peace, it turns out, is more powerful than noise. The HOA's misjudgment, the months of absurd letters, the tension that had invaded my home, all of it now serves as a testament to careful observation and strategic action. I look at my stall every day and remember that calm, informed persistence is a far more effective tool than shouting, confrontation, or retaliation. It was a long fight, almost invisible and without spectacle, but it restored more than a parking spot. It restored a sense of control over my life and my property that petty authority had tried to undermine. That quiet victory resonates more than any dramatic confrontation could, and in it, I found a form of justice that was entirely proportional, entirely lawful, and entirely mine. The lot is quiet, the stall is mine, and my life has returned to the rhythm I sought when I first moved here. Uninterrupted, serene, and completely under my control. This story of a revoked parking stall, an overreaching HOA, and a homeowner who refused to bend quietly is not about confrontation. It's about foresight, patience, and letting law and evidence dismantle tyranny gently but irrevocably. The subtle shift of power in a boardroom, the quiet humiliation of authority undone by facts, and the serene reclamation of daily life are all victories worth savoring. The lesson is simple. Understand your rights, document everything, and when the time comes, present the facts with quiet certainty. The parking stall remains, the peace remains, and the HOA has learned that authority without law is fragile, and sometimes all it takes is one homeowner to prove it.